They never saw me first. They saw him. And through him, they decided who I must be, too. I still remember that day with painful clarity, the kind that doesn't fade no matter how much time passes. I was standing a few steps away, watching everything unfold, my heart beating so loudly it felt like it might expose me. He stood there in his spotless uniform, posture straight, hands calm, eyes steady. Anyone who truly looked would have seen discipline, honor, restraint. But no one was really looking. They were judging. And they judged fast. His skin was dark. That was enough. I was raised to believe that uniforms meant safety, that authority meant protection. My father used to tell me that rules existed to keep order, to separate right from wrong. I believed him for most of my life. I believed that if someone worked hard, followed the law, did everything correctly, the world would meet them halfway. That illusion shattered right in front of me. When the accusation came, it didn't sound like doubt. It sounded like certainty. A man pointed at him with confidence, the kind that doesn't come from truth, but from comfort. The comfort of knowing the crowd would agree. No one asked questions. No one hesitated. I watched faces around me shift instantly into agreement, as if they had been waiting for this moment to confirm something ugly they already believed. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream that they were wrong. But fear wrapped around my throat. I had learned, as a woman, as someone who had seen how quickly narratives turn against you, that speaking at the wrong time could make you the next target. So I stood there, silent, ashamed of my silence, as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. That sound still haunts me. People around me whispered. Some nodded in approval. A few even smiled. It wasn't justice they were witnessing. It was validation. Validation of a prejudice they carried quietly, waiting for proof that never needed to be real. He didn't fight back. That hurt the most to watch. He stood still, dignity intact, even as it was being stripped from him. I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes stayed forward. Not defiance. Survival. He knew what resistance would cost him. He knew compliance was his only shield, even if it was a fragile one. As they took him away, I felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse of belief. I realized then that racism doesn't always wear anger on its face. Sometimes it wears calm. Sometimes it hides behind procedure. Sometimes it smiles politely while destroying someone's humanity. Hours later, the truth came out. Of course it did. Truth usually arrives late to rooms where prejudice is already seated comfortably. Cameras showed another man. Clear footage, clear innocence. The facts were undeniable. And yet, nothing was undone. The humiliation wasn't erased. The crowd wasn't gathered again to hear the correction. No one announced loudly that they had been wrong. They just let him go. I watched him walk out, free but changed. And I knew something else then, too. Freedom after injustice doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like survival. It feels like learning, once again, that the world can hurt you and move on without apology. I thought about my own life, the times I had been judged before speaking, doubted before proving myself, reduced to assumptions because of how I looked, where I came from, or what people thought I represented. I realized his story wasn't just his. It was ours. It was mine. It was every person who has ever been told silently, "You don't belong here," even when they did everything right. From that day on, I stopped believing that racism only lives in extreme moments. I saw it in small decisions, in who gets believed first, in who gets questioned longer, in who is forgiven, and who is remembered for one accusation forever. I saw how easily society protects its assumptions instead of its people. He went back to work, same uniform, same discipline, but I knew he carried something heavier now. And so did I. I carried the responsibility of not looking away again, of not staying silent when silence feels safer. Because silence is never neutral. Silence always chooses a side.
This story is not about one man in a uniform. It's about how quickly dignity can be denied and how slowly trust is repaired. It's about how racism doesn't need shouting crowds. It thrives perfectly well in quiet agreement. And it's about the painful truth I learned that day. Doing everything right does not guarantee fairness, especially if the world has already decided who you are. I tell this story because it needs to be told, because lessons that hurt are the ones that matter most, and because until we learn to see people before our prejudices, spotless uniforms will keep getting stained, not by crime, but by injustice.
After that day, I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. The real damage didn't happen at the station, or with the handcuffs, or even with the crowd. The real damage happened quietly, later, in places no one records on their phones. It happened in the way people remembered the story incorrectly. It happened in the pauses when his name came up. It happened in the looks that lingered just a second too long. I noticed it first in small things. Conversations would stop when he entered a room. Jokes would soften, then disappear. People who once greeted him easily now spoke carefully, as if proximity itself required caution. Even after the truth was proven, even after the footage showed everything clearly, the stain remained. False accusations don't vanish just because they're disproved. They sink in, they settle, they live on in whispers. I watched him change, not on the surface, but underneath. He still stood straight, still followed every rule, still spoke with respect, but the ease was gone. The quiet confidence he once carried had been replaced with constant alertness. He was no longer just doing his job, he was defending his existence every minute he wore that uniform. And I understood him more than he knew. As a woman, I had learned early that the world listens differently to you, that your tone matters more than your words, that anger makes you difficult and silence makes you weak. Watching him, I realized how similar our struggles were, even if they looked different on the outside. We both lived in a world that required us to be perfect just to be considered acceptable. What hurt me most was realizing how easily people moved on. The crowd that had watched him being taken away never gathered again to witness his innocence. The same voices that were loud with judgment were suddenly quiet. No one felt responsible for correcting the story they had helped spread. Accountability, I learned, is often reserved for the accused, not the accusers. One evening, I finally asked him how he was doing. He smiled politely, the kind of smile that answers nothing. Then he said something I will never forget. He said he wasn't angry at being accused. He said he was angry that no one was surprised, that no one had stopped to say, "This doesn't make sense," that no one had given him even a moment of doubt before assuming the worst. That sentence sat heavy in my chest. Because he was right. The most dangerous part of racism isn't hatred, it's expectation. The expectation that certain people are more likely to be guilty, the expectation that they must prove innocence while others are granted it automatically. That expectation had wrapped itself around him so tightly that even truth struggled to breathe inside it. I started paying closer attention to my own reactions after that, to the quick assumptions I didn't even realize I was making, to the stories I accepted without questioning because they felt familiar. It scared me to see how easy it was to slip into the same patterns I thought I opposed. Racism doesn't survive only through bad people. It survives through comfortable ones. There were days he talked about leaving, about how exhausting it was to love a system that didn't love him back. I didn't blame him. Loyalty, when it's one-sided, becomes self-destruction. Yet he stayed. Not because he believed things would magically improve, but because he believed someone had to remain visible, someone had to exist in that space and refuse to disappear. I admired that strength, but I also feared the cost of it. The incident followed him like a shadow. New faces didn't know the full story, only fragments, a rumor, a memory, a suggestion. That's how injustice survives, through incomplete truths. And every time he had to prove himself again, I felt the weight of a system that demanded
endless patience from the same people it kept hurting. I tell this part of the story because racism doesn't end when the cuffs come off. It continues in reputation, in opportunity, in mental scars no one sees. It continues in the way trust is broken, not just with institutions, but with people. It teaches you to expect less, to hope cautiously, to protect yourself even when you've done nothing wrong. Watching him taught me something deeply uncomfortable. Innocence is not always enough. Truth is not always enough, and fairness, when filtered through prejudice, becomes conditional. That realization changed me. I stopped staying quiet to keep peace. I stopped assuming silence was harmless. I learned that witnessing injustice and doing nothing makes you part of its survival. And I promised myself that if I ever saw that look again, the look of someone being judged before being heard, I would not look away. Because stories like his don't need sympathy, they need honesty. They need us to admit that racism is not rare, not accidental, not exaggerated. It is practiced daily, often politely, often without words. And until we confront that, spotless uniforms will continue to be questioned, dignity will continue to be denied, and people like him will keep paying for crimes they never committed. This is not just his story. It is a warning. I didn't realize how deeply that day would follow me until much later, when I caught myself hesitating in moments that once felt simple. Speaking up, trusting systems, believing explanations without evidence. Racism doesn't only scar the person it targets, it reshapes the witnesses, too. It teaches you fear in quiet ways. It teaches you caution where courage should live. I watched him continue, day after day, carrying himself with a grace that felt almost unfair. Unfair that he had to be so careful. Unfair that excellence was expected of him as a minimum requirement, not a distinction. Every mistake, no matter how small, felt like it would be magnified. Every success felt temporary, as if it could be taken away by the next accusation, the next pointed finger. What stayed with me most was how lonely dignity can be. People praised him for being strong, for handling it well, as if strength were an obligation instead of a burden. No one asked whether he was tired of being strong. No one asked what it costs to swallow injustice just to survive another day. I began to understand that racism isn't always loud cruelty. Often, it's exhaustion. The exhaustion of explaining yourself, of proving yourself, of knowing that one accusation can undo years of honesty. It's living with the awareness that the benefit of the doubt is a luxury you were never given. The world likes simple endings. Arrests reversed, truth revealed, case closed. But real life doesn't work that way. The story didn't end when he was cleared. It continued in the way people remembered him, in the way opportunities quietly shifted, in the way trust never fully returned to its original shape. I carried this story because it taught me something painful and necessary. Justice is not automatic, and fairness is not neutral. They depend on people, on their courage to question, to slow down, to see a human being before a stereotype. When people fail to do that, injustice doesn't need evil to thrive. It just needs indifference. If you ask me what the lesson is, I won't dress it up. The lesson is this: doing everything right will not protect you from racism. Silence will not protect you from racism. Respectability will not protect you from racism. The only thing that weakens it is awareness followed by action. I tell this story so that maybe, next time, someone pauses. Maybe someone asks one more question. Maybe someone refuses to let assumptions decide a person's fate. Because one pause, one voice, one refusal to agree silently, that can be enough to change the outcome. His skin was dark. His uniform was spotless. They treated him like a criminal. But the real crime would be letting stories like this repeat without learning anything from them. And if we do learn, if we truly learn, then this story won't just be a memory. It will be a responsibility.